Look, death is coming. It could be around the corner. It could be 50 years down the line. But eventually, the Reaper is going to knock at your door, and eventually, humanity's. That's why we need to upload our consciousness into robots. For the sake of humanity, not just because it'd be cool. Livelock is a top-down shooter set in a war for the fate of humankind, and releases on the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, along with the PC storefronts of Steam and the Humble Bundle store. It launches on August 30th, 2016, and costs $19.99. I played the game for about 8 hours and beat it, and played it a little bit more to get additional footage. Mostly due to a stupid mistake on my part when recording the footage. But here's the question. Can this top-down shooter set in the future set itself apart from all the other top-down shooters out there? Or will it just be another robot on the assembly line, indistinguishable from the rest? That's what I'm here to find out, but before I begin, this key was obtained from the publisher for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? The story in the game isn't the focus, but that doesn't mean the game doesn't have one. And to say that Livelock is squarely in the sci-fi genre would be a bit of an understatement. That's because you've seen the base themes and storylines that Livelock presents here time and time before. Basically, humankind was facing the threat of a global extinction event called the Cataclysm. Scientists foresaw what was coming though, and realized that there was only one way that mankind was going to survive. And that was to upload their human consciousness into robots. So, after some failed experiments and some sacrifices along the way, a portion of the human race was uploaded before the Earth was hit. This is referred to as Eden in the game, because of course we have to have our garden and biblical references. This story specifically follows 3 humans who were uploaded, codenamed Hex, Vanguard, and Catalyst. They wake up in their new bodies several years later after the Cataclysm to find that things aren't exactly going as planned. See, the Cataclysm actually ended up doing more damage than originally thought. Some of the robots ended up getting corrupted due to the Cataclysm. Now a war is broken out, as one side is trying to ensure the extinction of mankind, while one is trying to keep it alive. This is your typical dystopian story here, complete with a twist that you can see coming a mile away. Now some people may yell, "Spoilers, Dragnix!" But if you don't see this twist coming after the game hits you over the head with it repeatedly, you're not paying attention. The writing is average for this kind of game, not anything unique in the genre, but not painstakingly bad either. Basically, if you've read a robot uprising novel or a human extinction sci-fi novel, you know what to expect here story-wise. As to the story itself, I suppose it does the job, but it frankly takes a backseat to the gameplay. It's not that I don't want to know about this world, it's just, well, it's not exactly the most appealing when it comes to the writing. To be frank, it feels sort of forced in there, not woven together, more like, here's a story to go along with your gameplay. Granted, the audio logs are what helps the game out a lot, as you learn a little of the backstory behind what happened here. But other than that, the intrigue isn't going to be there for most people in this plot. The biggest gripe I have with these stories and these characters has to do with the use of popular quotes, because 3/4 of the time, they just come out of nowhere. I get that you're trying to get a B-action sci-fi movie feel out of these characters, but it just doesn't work here. I groaned in all the wrong ways after another famous quote was blurted out, and part of the issue here is a consistency. If a character were to use only alien-related quotes, for example, okay, fine. But here, they are all over the place. There's no character consistency. And that's where the story is the weakest, the characters. The story isn't the draw of Livelock, and it sort of shows. I have seen a lot worse in the genre, however, but it's clear that the developers focused on gameplay more than anything else. Despite being another top-down shooter set in a sci-fi universe, the amount of detail in Livelock's presentation left me rather impressed at times. Granted, you may look at this at first and may see yet another top-down shooter, but looking closely on Ultra settings, you can see a hell of a lot of detail here. Normally, you lose a lot of detail within the environments and the characters when you've got the top-down perspective in these kinds of games. And yet for Livelock, I can seemingly see a lot of detail. I don't know what it is, whether it be the camera angle or the use of the lighting, but Livelock definitely delivers in the visual department. See the rock formations here and their actual detail, down to the cracks in the floors. Now note, I reviewed the PC version of this game, so I played with the best graphic settings possible. I'll put up the medium and low settings as well side by side here, for those who may not be able to run those larger settings. You can see enemies climbing up the individual walls, and you can actually follow them while they go after you. In battle, things are usually clean enough for you to see what's going on. But once in a blue moon, the chaos will get a little bit too much for what's on the screen, and you may get confused. But frankly, you'll be so in the thick of things, you really won't notice. So the aesthetic definitely complements the gameplay here. Now the environments actually do hit a bit of variety, as they go from the Arctic tundras of Moscow to the deserts of Tokyo? I mean, granted, this is basically a post-apocalyptic world, so okay, I guess it makes some sense. You can learn a little about the world in the ruined buildings and the different stores and signs that you come across. My personal favorite being the store named Dollar. Just so simple. But my favorite part of the aesthetic has to do with the robots themselves. You get to customize your robots, and it's a nice little touch here, in particular with the capes. They seem like things found in the world, including an emergency blanket for this robot here. I hate to say it, but this looks swag. Yes, I'm not popular with the hip kids, in case you were wondering. Anyway, the heads all have interesting designs, and the color palettes are reasonably different from each other. You'll make a really cool looking character, and then want to change it up to something completely different for the next mission. Sound-wise, the game is alright. Good firing and environmental sounds add to the gameplay and were noticed when I turned them off. But on the other hand, nothing that made me really take notice of them when they were actually on. It was a bit weird. It's pretty much standard for the genre, I would say. The voice acting for all parties has a robotic element added to them, but they do a good job of making everything feel artificial because of it. Take a listen to what I'm talking about in the following clip.
Satcom, why do you pervert my frequencies?
To rightfully assert my control over the surface.
I'm afraid your logic is flawed.
Music-wise, it's appropriate, but a lot of the music pieces end up blending together. A lot of them are haunting and dystopian pieces, almost horror-like in several of the cases. The problem here is simple. It's just that all the pieces sound the same. In several of the cases, I wouldn't have been able to tell you one level's music from another. I'll try to give you some variety in the clips here, but know that it all blends together in the end. The presentation may be the most surprising portion of Livelock. You hear top-down shooter, you expect the presentation to be okay, but Livelock takes it up a notch and comes out ahead because of it. In battle, the gameplay keeps up with the frame rate, although once in a while, the game seemingly pauses to load for a brief tiny second. You never feel hindered, as the game is responsive to your controls, and there's no input delay. Things are clean, and seeing a robot fly across the screen as it's blown to smithereens was always satisfying. Where it seemed to have problems frame rate wise is the cutscenes, but maybe it's just the way the cutscenes played out presentation wise. It seemed choppy to me personally, but judge it based on what footage I'm showing you here. Keyboard control wise, the game is definitely playable. I did prefer the 360 controller, however, and luckily, the game supports controllers. While the keyboard may have better accuracy for firing thanks to the mouse, the 360 movement just lends itself to the controller a bit more thanks to the control sticks. But again, both are playable. I will add a slight dehancer for the keyboard crowd out there, which will come into play later in the review. Here's a list of the settings available. Bindable keys for both the controller and the keyboard, with several different settings for resolution and quality. There's also full screen and not, as well as an FPS limiter, which is nice. More games need this. Now it defaults to 60, but I'll show some footage of some of the different limits here. Granted, your machine needs the power to actually take advantage of that, and my machine specs are in the description below. Overall, a reasonable port of the game. Some hiccups here and there, but definitely worth getting on the PC just for that FPS slider alone. So of course, I'm going to add an enhancer to this review. Let's now get to the heart of the game, its gameplay. You should know the basic formula that Livelock brings to the table. It's a top-down shooter. Enemies appear on screen. You shoot or punch those enemies, they die. Repeat until end of level, or until you die and you have to respawn. You have 3 playable characters here in your typical class format. Your sniper class, your melee class, and your support class. Now don't think that each class only focuses on one thing, as they can all equally bring forms of metal pain. There's an RPG progression system here, so you'll start off a little underpowered, and you'll upgrade yourself with experience and with credits you find in your missions. In terms of weaponry, you've got some standard weapons you would expect from the genre for your base weapons. Lasers, laser pistols, laser assault rifles, and giant frickin' hammers. That's at least for your first weapon slot, but things get a bit more varied in the second and third slot. Some will have rail-like guns, and some will have guns that can convert enemies to your side for a period of time. Now, while there are some repeats between the different characters here, I was overall satisfied with the different choices available and the different loadouts you could create. Overall, the gameplay is fun. The game does a good job of mixing up the challenge in smaller enemies versus enhanced large enemies, and the game has a good baseline set of difficulties. I mostly played the game on the hard mode, and I did die a bit during it. But here's the thing, it's the score kind of difficult. Getting through a level isn't hard, because you have infinite lives, but your overall score at the end of a level will suffer time-wise as well as multiplier penalties for the times you died. So score chasers will get more out of the difficulty of this game. That's an enhancer, by the way. This is the kind of brainless, yet not brainless shooting glee that I love about the genre. Sure, I can go in guns a-blazing, and dodging around and attacking may get me through things, but there's layers of strategy to take advantage of here, like using melee against shield enemies you have trouble getting through. You'll have to learn when to pull out the big guns and to use that cooldown skill, and it really does well in the Twitch action genre there with strategy. The game's mission variety does help this a bit. In one case, you'll look for a couple of towers to knock out. Others, you'll have to escort a huge drone, which will recover if you're in a certain distance from it. Now granted, most of the time you're killing enemies, and killing more enemies, but it never felt monotonous here. It always felt rather fresh, and that's thanks to good enemy variety and recycling of assets for the most part. It's really all about the pace that's created in the combat. There's a sweet spot that a top-down shooter should hit, and Livelock hits it. The action ramps up, and you're in the thick of things all at once, but then it slightly backs off, giving you time to recover. It allows you to push the pace by running into the next section, and rarely does the combat have downtime. Some top-down shooters miss the mark here when it comes to this, adding enemies or mechanics that force you to step back in the middle of combat, not being actively involved. But with Livelock, if you're in the combat, you are doing something actively at all times, which is why it works so well. I have to mention this too. The physics engine is silly, but hell if it's not fun. Pushing around cars and knocking over walls never gets old to me. It's not realistic at times, but you know what? It's fun. Destructible environments are always fun. Don't tell me you don't like breaking shit. Granted, I'm a sucker for them, but it brings a childlike glee to toss a car around like it's a fly. Now, Livelock has online co-op play for up to 3 players, and the brief time I spent playing with people on Steam was solid in terms of connection and playability. The netcode seems to be there, but I do have to apologize to the one guy that I went AFK on. I forgot that the default mode is public games. Sorry, dude. There's just one tiny itsy bitsy thing that you need to know regarding co-op play. If you were expecting couch co-op, think again. Now, the game did not advertise itself with local co-op, and only online co-op was put in because it was the more popular one requested based on developer discussions. With that said, those looking for a local co-op experience, Livelock is not going to deliver it for you. So that's a D-hancer to the score. You've also got a basic survival mode here, but it's nothing to write home about. Survive as long as you can, but there's no options for level layout or even enhancers of any kind. It's rather basic at its core, and felt like it was added to get that point on the back of the box. It's sort of forgettable. Which leads me to my biggest complaint about the gameplay here, its replayability. Your character keeps getting stronger, not to the point where he completely outclasses characters, but the boons of some of the extra elements just makes things really easy. There's no procedural generation or randomization of any sort here, which means that you're going to find the same enemies in the same places over and over again. Playing gets repetitive, and frankly, boring at times. You can start a new character, but I wanted to see some kind of change up here. In the end, Livelock was a fun time during the first run of the campaign, and it was even more fun when playing with others. It didn't blow me away gameplay-wise, but it did enough to keep the adrenaline going and keep me focused on the action. There is surprising elements here and there in the presentation as well. Just don't expect a game that's going to flip the genre on its head. In the end, it gets an 81 out of 100 for me, making it a solid game to pick up if you're not hurting for cash. But like always with my big reviews, apply the following enhancers if you strongly fall into the categories listed here. Only if you strongly fall into the category though. If you're on the fence, don't apply it, as these enhancers are designed for those who let that category drive their gameplay, not be a secondary part. Also, like always, I'm just one reviewer, and I encourage people to always get a second opinion on a game. I try to be as objective as possible, but hey, even I can miss something. Check out Critic for that, as it's the better version of Metacritic for gaming. You can follow specific reviewers, or ignore specific ones if they don't fall into your category. I'm part of Critic's Contributors Program, able to be listed along with some of the big fish in the industry. Anyway, thanks for watching the review. Coming up soon on the channel will be my Deus Ex Mankind Divided review, along with a Hatsume Miku Diva X review as well. And a little bit of a rant after what happened in terms of YouTube. Just a tiny one. But for now, time to get back to the grind. And as always, keep on gaming. Thanks for watching. Like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe if you want more content like this. In the description below, you'll find the Steam review accompanying this vid, along with social media that you can follow me on, Twitter, Google+, and Facebook groups. And if you want to support the channel, click that Patreon on the left of the screen. And remember, keep on gaming.